The crashing waves outside the Malibu beach house usually offered a sense of tranquility, a rhythmic reminder of the world's enduring beauty. But for Will Spencer, the sound was nothing more than a mocking echo of his own shattered reality. The beach house, once a sanctuary of love and shared dreams with Electra Forrester, had transformed into a cold, suffocating prison of his own making. The air inside was heavy, thick with the pungent, unmistakable scent of stale alcohol and profound despair. Empty bottles littered the expensive coffee table, catching the dim, fading light of the afternoon sun, serving as silent witnesses to a young man's rapid and terrifying descent into darkness. Will sat slumped on the edge of the sofa, his posture screaming of defeat, his eyes bloodshot and vacant as he stared at the empty spaces where Electra's belongings used to rest. The crushing weight of the past few days had finally broken him, leaving behind nothing but a hollow shell of the confident Spencer heir he once was. Will's mind was a relentless, agonizing loop of his most recent, catastrophic mistakes. He could not escape the horrifying memory of the bikini bar, the chaotic blur of the physical altercation, and the sickening crunch of his fist accidentally colliding with Eric Forrester's face. He had only meant to strike back at R.J. Forrester, the cousin who had relentlessly provoked him, but R.J. had masterfully ducked, leaving the beloved Forrester patriarch to take the devastating blow. The visual of Eric falling, the severe black eye, and the absolute horror on Electra's face in the aftermath played over and over in Will's alcohol-soaked brain. He had been branded a violent monster, an out-of-control thug by Ridge Forrester, who hypocritically ignored his own recent history of punching Bill Spencer in the face. But the hypocrisy of the Forrester family did not matter now. The only thing that mattered was that Electra had looked at Will not with love, but with genuine, unfiltered terror and disgust. The corporate war between Logan Creations and Forrester Creations had been the match that lit this destructive fire, but Will was the one burning in the wreckage. He had been forced by his mother, Katie Logan, to keep massive, game-changing secrets from Electra. He had hidden Hope Logan's shocking defection to Logan, the development of Shauna Fulton's rival jewelry line, and the acquisition of the priceless Hope for the future Diamond. He had tried to be a loyal son and a good soldier for the Spencer and Logan alliance, but in doing so, he had poisoned the well of trust with the woman he loved. When the secrets exploded and the physical violence followed, Electra had permanently severed their bond, throwing her necklace at him and walking out of the beach house, seemingly forever. Now, drowning in a sea of amber liquid, Will felt the absolute, crushing isolation of a man who had lost his entire world and had no one to blame but himself. The heavy, oppressive silence of the beach house was suddenly shattered by the sharp, metallic click of the front door unlocking. Will barely registered the sound, his dulled senses slow to react, assuming perhaps it was Wyatt coming to deliver. Another harsh reality check, or perhaps his father, Bill, arriving to gloat about the Spencer victory over Forrester. But as the door swung open, the figure that stepped into the dimly lit living room made Will's blood run instantly cold. It was not a concerned brother or a fiercely protective father. It was R.J. Forrester. R.J. stood in the doorway, dressed in impeccably tailored designer clothes, his hair perfectly styled, radiating an aura of absolute, sickening triumph. The contrast between the two young men could not have been more stark. R.J., the pristine, victorious golden boy of the Forrester dynasty, and Will, the disheveled, broken, and intoxicated outcast. Ray J did not immediately speak. He took his time, stepping into the living room with a slow, deliberate swagger, his eyes scanning the empty bottles and Will's ruined state with profound amusement. He had come under the guise of a helpful friend, arriving to collect the very last of Electra's remaining belongings, a few boxes of personal items she had left behind in her frantic, heartbroken exit. But as RJ moved through the space, picking up a framed photograph of Will and Electra that had been left on a side table, his true motive became glaringly obvious. He was not there just to run an errand for the woman he was actively trying to claim for himself. He was there to gloat, to twist the knife, and to revel in the absolute destruction of his romantic rival. "Look at you." RJ finally spoke, his voice dripping with a toxic mixture of pity and condescension. The sound of his voice cut through Will's alcohol-induced haze like a jagged piece of glass. "I knew you were pathetic, Will, but this is a whole new level of pathetic, even for a Spencer." RJ casually tossed the framed photograph into an open cardboard box, the glass cracking slightly against another object. The sound made Will flinch, a surge of protective instinct battling against the heavy lethargy in his limbs. Will tried to stand, his legs unsteady, his vision swimming slightly as he faced the cousin who had so masterfully orchestrated his downfall. He wanted to scream, to defend himself, to explain that the punch was meant for RJ, that the entire narrative had been twisted, but the words felt like ash in his dry throat. RJ did not wait for a response. He leaned against the back of the sofa, crossing his arms, his smirk widening into a full, victorious smile. "Electra sent me." RJ lied effortlessly, knowing exactly how to inflict the maximum amount of psychological pain. "She didn't want to step foot in this place again. She didn't want to breathe the same air as you. And honestly, looking at you right now, I can't blame her. You're a mess, Will, an out-of-control, violent mess." Ray J's words were calculated, precise strikes aimed directly at Will's deepest insecurities. He was weaponizing Electra's absence, using her name as a bludgeon to beat Will down further into the dirt. The alcohol in Will's system, which had previously acted as a numbing agent, suddenly ignited, transforming into a volatile, burning rage. His hands balled into tight fists at his sides, his knuckles turning white as he struggled to maintain his composure. He remembered Wyatt's warnings. He remembered his father's advice. He knew that engaging with RJ was a dangerous, losing game, especially now, especially when he was already branded a violent threat by the entire Forrester family. But RJ was relentless, a master manipulator who knew exactly which buttons to press to elicit the desired reaction. He took a step closer to Will, invading his personal space, the scent of expensive cologne clashing violently with the smell of spilled whiskey. "You never deserved her," RJ spat, his tone dropping the faux pity and adopting a harsh, venomous edge. "You never deserved a Forrester. You're just a thug, Will, a typical, brute force Spencer who solves all his problems with his fists because he's too stupid to use his brain. You couldn't handle the pressure of a real relationship. You couldn't handle the business world without lying to her face. And when things got tough, you lashed out like a wild animal and attacked my grandfather." RJ paused, letting the weight of the accusation hang in the heavy air. "You're a danger to society, Will. You're a danger to Electra." And she finally sees it. She finally sees the monster you truly are. The word monster snapped the last, fragile thread of Will's self-control. The rational part of his brain, the part that urged caution and restraint, was completely overwhelmed by a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated fury. In a fraction of a second, the distance between them vanished. Will lunged forward, his movements fueled by adrenaline and raw, blinding anger. He reached out, his hands violently grabbing the lapels of RJ's expensive designer jacket, twisting the fabric tightly in his fists as he shoved RJ backward. Ray J stumbled, his back hitting the wall with a dull thud, the sudden physical impact knocking the smug smile right off his face. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, Will was entirely consumed by the urge to strike, to wipe the arrogant, manipulative look off RJ's face permanently, to make him pay for the lies, the setups, and the theft of the woman he loved. Will's breathing was heavy, ragged, echoing loudly in the tense, suffocating silence of the room. His fist was pulled back, trembling with the sheer force of his restrained violence. He stared into RJ's eyes, expecting to see fear, expecting to see the cowardice he knew resided beneath the polished Forrester exterior. But as Will's vision tunneled, entirely focused on his cousin's face, a sudden, subtle shift in the lighting caught his peripheral vision. A shadow had fallen across the entryway of the living room. The air in the room seemed to freeze, the temperature dropping instantly as a chilling realization washed over Will. He did not need to turn his head to know who was standing there. The delicate, unmistakable scent of Electra's perfume briefly cut through the stench of alcohol, a ghostly reminder of the love he was currently holding hostage with his violence. Slowly, agonizingly, Will turned his head toward the doorway. There she was. Electra Forrester stood frozen in the entrance of the beach house, her hand still resting on the doorknob she had just turned. She had come back, perhaps to collect the items herself, perhaps harboring a tiny, lingering sliver of hope that the man she loved was not the monster her family claimed him to be. But that hope was now dead, murdered in cold blood by the visual playing out before her eyes. She saw Will, disheveled, reeking of alcohol, his face contorted in rage, his hands violently gripping her cousin, pinning him against the wall with his fist raised, ready to strike. It was the ultimate, devastating confirmation of every single warning Ridge and Eric had drilled into her head. It was the undeniable proof that Will Spencer was exactly the violent, out-of-control thug they said he was. The moment RJ realized Electra was watching, a miraculous, sickening transformation occurred. The arrogant, instigating provocateur vanished instantly, replaced by a flawless, Oscar-worthy performance of a terrified, helpless victim. Ray J's eyes widened in feigned panic, his breathing hitching dramatically as he looked past Will toward Electra. He let out a pathetic, trembling gasp, his hands coming up in a defensive, submissive posture, desperately trying to pry Will's iron grip off his jacket. "Will, please!" RJ cried out, his voice cracking with perfectly manufactured terror. "Please, don't hit me again. I just came to get her things, I swear. Please, calm down." He began to physically tremble, his body shaking against the wall, a masterful display of vulnerability designed solely to weaponize Electra's empathy. Will felt a sudden, sickening drop in his stomach, a profound nausea that had nothing to do with the alcohol in his system. The trap had snapped shut, and the metal teeth were buried deep in his soul. He looked from RJ's brilliantly faked terror back to Electra's face, and what he saw broke him completely. Electra's eyes were wide, brimming with tears that rapidly spilled over her eyelashes, tracing glistening paths down her pale cheeks. Her lips were parted in a silent gasp of horror, her hands trembling as she brought them up to cover her mouth. She wasn't looking at a man who had been provoked to his breaking point. She was looking at a predator, a dangerous liability that needed to be escaped. Will's hands suddenly felt like they were burning. He released RJ's jacket as if the fabric was made of fire, stumbling backward, his hands raised in a desperate, futile gesture of surrender. "Electra, wait, it's not what it looks like," Will pleaded, his voice cracking, the desperation bleeding through every syllable. "He provoked me. He came in here and pushed every button. He was mocking me, mocking us." But the words sounded hollow, pathetic even to his own ears. How could he explain the invisible psychological warfare when the physical evidence was so damningly clear? He had laid hands on RJ. He had raised his fist. In the immediate aftermath of the bikini bar incident, this was the absolute worst possible scenario. He had handed RJ the final nail for his own coffin, and RJ had hammered it in with absolute precision. "Stop," Electra whispered, her voice barely audible, yet it echoed through the room with the force of a thunderclap. She stepped fully into the room, her eyes locked on Will, completely devoid of the warmth and love that used to reside there. Now, there was only a profound, chilling emptiness, a wall of self-preservation that had been erected to keep him out permanently. "Just stop. Will, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear another excuse, another lie, another justification for why you can't control your own rage. She walked past him, keeping a wide, cautious berth as if he were a wild animal that might strike again at any moment. She moved directly to RJ, who was still playing his part to perfection, sliding down the wall slightly, clutching his chest as if trying to calm a racing heart. "Are you okay, RJ?" Electra asked, her voice trembling with genuine concern as she placed a gentle, protective hand on his shoulder. RJ looked up at her, his eyes wide and innocent, giving a small, shaky nod. "I'm fine," RJ whispered, his voice trembling perfectly. I just wanted to get your things so you wouldn't have to face him. I didn't mean to make him angry." The sheer audacity of the lie, the brilliant, sociopathic execution of the manipulation, left Will paralyzed. He stood in the center of his ruined living room, a ghost witnessing his own funeral. He wanted to rage, to tear the room apart, to expose RJ for the cunning, manipulative snake he was, but he knew that any further outburst would only solidify Electra's belief that he was unhinged. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, entirely outmaneuvered by a cousin who played the game of victimhood with terrifying expertise. Electra turned back to Will, her tears now flowing freely, her expression a devastating mix of heartbreak and finality. "My grandfather was right," she said, the words slicing through Will's heart with surgical precision. "My Uncle Ridge was right. You are dangerous. Will, you are completely out of control. I thought I knew you. I thought the man who punched Eric was just a mistake, a horrible accident. But this is who you are. You solve your pain with violence. You punish people for your own mistakes." She let out a ragged sob, shaking her head as if trying to physically dislodge the memories of their love. "I can't do this anymore. I can't be with someone I have to be afraid of. I can't be with someone who attacks my family." Will stood frozen, the tears welling in his own eyes, blurring his vision. "Electra, please," he whispered, a final, broken plea from a man who knew he had already lost. "I love you. I would never hurt you. You know that." "You have to know that," but Electra simply closed her eyes, turning her face away from him, unable to bear the sight of his pain. She reached down, helping RJ to his feet. RJ leaned heavily against her, playing the injured party, his arm draped over her shoulder. As they turned to leave, RJ looked back over his shoulder at Will. For one split second, the facade dropped. The terrified victim vanished, and the smug, triumphant, victorious manipulator returned. RJ offered Will a subtle, chilling smirk, a silent declaration of absolute victory, before turning his face back to Electra, resuming his mask of distress. Will watched in agonizing silence as Electra and RJ walked out the door. He didn't follow them. He didn't call out. He just stood there, rooted to the floor, as the heavy wooden door clicked shut, the sound echoing with terrifying finality. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was deafening. It was the sound of complete and utter isolation. Will Spencer was entirely alone. He had lost the love of his life, his reputation, and his dignity, all stripped away by a combination of his own foolish impulsivity and the brilliant, ruthless cunning of RJ Forrester. As the reality of his situation settled over him like a suffocating blanket, Will slowly sank to his knees in the middle of the living room. He was surrounded by the wreckage of his life, the empty bottles, the packed boxes, the lingering scent of a future that would never happen. He had completely fallen into RJ's trap. He had allowed his anger to dictate his actions, and in doing so, he had proven his enemies right. Ridge Forrester's narrative had won. The Forrester family had successfully purged the Spencer threat from their ranks, and RJ had claimed the ultimate prize. Will buried his face in his hands, a ragged, tearing sob ripping from his throat, the sound swallowed by the vast, uncaring emptiness of the beach house. The corporate war between Logan and Forrester might rage on in the boardrooms of Los Angeles, but here, In the shattered remnants of his personal life, Will Spencer had suffered a total, devastating defeat from which he might never recover.